The Wanderer. A wretched creature cursed am I, doomed to live and never die. I walk the earth, thus hear my cry, death's harbinger whose tidings bring I. Thy end draweth nigh. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest in a small town right on the edge of the forest. And even though it was usually dark, rainy, and cloudy, beautiful was the first word that came to mind when describing it. There were tall green pine trees that extended far into the low gray clouds that crawled slowly by, dumping buckets of rain on any given day. But more than that were the beautiful mountain ranges that made it the perfect view. As in most small towns, there was nothing to do and everybody knew everybody. If there was a party, the entire school knew about it, and everyone from the jocks to the outcasts would be there. I'll never forget that weekend, the weekend that set this all into motion like a bad dream, like a nightmare that will never end. It was the start of my senior year of high school, and Todd Jenkins was having this big high school bash for all the seniors to close out our final summer as kids. Lord knows I didn't truly know what that would mean. My friends and I decided to attend. We weren't popular, but we weren't losers either. So as usual, we loaded up in Randy's old Chevy Astra and drove the desolate 2-mile drive to the other end of town, to Todd's larger-than-life mansion that his lawyer father no doubt put some innocent people in prison to afford. The party was hopping before we even got there, evidenced by the thumping stereo bass echoing into the damp night sky all the way down to the end of the road. The walk into the house was no different. A couple of kids were dancing through the hallway, others playing some kind of party game in the other room, and then, of course, the several kids wearing Letterman's jackets from the rival high school one county over. We saw another group huddled next to the fireplace talking and laughing as they sat in the couches. It was Todd and his girlfriend Rachel, Zach Finley, and some other senior girl I didn't know very well, but she was nice enough in the few times I'd ever had to deal with her. These kids weren't friends per se, but friendly enough to me and my two friends Ricky and Randy. We went over to join them, sitting down in the open spots on the couch. Randy found a spot on the floor just in front of the fire. "Glad you guys could make it," Todd said with a big smile on his face. "No problem," I said. "Not a whole lot else to do on the last Saturday of summer." He gave a small laugh and sat back into the couch. A small but awkward silence followed, and me being the type of person that doesn't handle silence very well had to break it. "So, what are you guys up to then?"
"Oh, nothing,"
Rachel said.
"Todd's just trying to scare us with some made-up story that he came up with."
"It's not made up, I'm telling you. It's real," he said with an ever so slight irritation starting to form on his face. I laughed a bit, but the more I looked at his face, the more I realized he was either irritated that we weren't more afraid of his made-up story, or he genuinely believed what he was sharing with them. In hindsight, I wish I would have left it alone. I wish I'd had the knowledge I have now and just moved past it as Todd seemed content to do in that very moment. But I did what most people would do. Intrigued by what could put him so on edge, and also the lover of a good scary story, I had to know more. "So let's hear it then," I said, leaning forward in the leather sofa as it screeched beneath my jeans. "Hear what?" Todd responded. He knew exactly what I meant, and whether it was fear or embarrassment, he didn't seem to want to tell the story over again. I doubled down. "The story. I'm saying let's hear the story. I'm always up for something that makes it a little harder to shut out the lights at night," I said, turning to Ricky and Randy and getting nods of agreement in return. "Nah, I'm good," Todd said, falling back into the sofa and taking a long swig of whatever drink he had in his cup. "Oh, come on," Zach said. "Don't be such a baby about it. Nick says he wants to hear it, so let him hear it." Todd and I locked eyes, and while I could see the reluctance in his face, I could tell he was already preparing the story in his head. He leaned forward again, setting his cup down on the coffee table in front of him and rubbing his hands together. "Fine," he said before locking eyes with me again. "So a couple nights ago, my older brother asked me if I wanted to go out camping in the woods like we used to do when we were kids before he headed back off to college. The weather was supposed to be nice, overcast as usual, and only light rain at the most. We hadn't gotten to hang out much this summer, so I jumped at the opportunity. We packed light, threw some bread and peanut butter in one of the packs, and headed out in his truck. We didn't travel too far off the road, maybe a mile or so, and then set up camp for the night. It was awesome, right? Just me and my brother swapping stories about the past year just like we did when we were kids and before he moved out. Once the sun went down for the evening, we set up a fire and just kept talking. It seemed like it was going to be a great night. Not long before we were about to call it a night, it started to drizzle. We knew the fire would go out soon, so we put it out of its misery and sat for a few more minutes in the dark. By this time, I started losing interest. It didn't seem like the story was going anywhere, and I assumed this was about the point that Todd was going to tell us that a black bear cub or something like that stumbled into their camp, or that he heard a rustling in the dark and it turned out to be a possum or something. But what Todd actually said had me leaning all the way forward in my seat. We heard it, as if it were within only a few feet. Todd continued on. There was a real fear in his eyes that made the story feel even more real. It was a deep growl just inside the tree line of the campsite, maybe 20 feet away. Todd took a subtle pause, seemingly collecting his thoughts, but he stared at the coffee table mindlessly in front of him, almost like he'd been transported back there, whether it was impatience, nervousness, or just a need to break the silence. Ricky chimed in. Okay, so just a growl, I mean? So probably a bear, right? He asked, surveying the room incredulously. But it was then that Todd reacted fiercely, frustrated. No, why does everybody keep saying that? He sat back again, calming himself almost immediately. I'm sorry,
It's okay.
Rachel said.
Just say what you want to say.
Todd surveyed the room, looking briefly at all of us in the eye. It may have just been to see if he had us fooled, as I still wasn't convinced this wasn't all just some big production to get the first gullible bunch he could find to fall for his elaborate story of a monster in the woods. But apparently he saw what he needed to as he dug in for the rest of his story. It wasn't like an animal growl. It sounded human, but deeper. I'm sure he could see the skeptical looks on all of our faces, but he carried on this time anyway. We could see it, silhouetted in the faded moonlight through the misty clouds. We could see its heavy breath floating away into the darkness overhead. It just sat there, staring at us. Todd hadn't made eye contact with any of us for some time at this point, and there was no debating, he sold it well. I wasn't convinced, but everybody else around the table seemed to be. So what did you do? Randy finally asked. Todd chuckled. We ran, of course, didn't grab our tent or gear. We just hightailed it back to the truck and didn't speak about it again. By this point, some kind of fight had broken out in one of the other rooms where some shouting had come from. Todd got up quickly to go defuse whatever it was, leaving the rest of us to sit in silence with our thoughts before discussing what he had just relayed to us. What a load of nonsense, right? The rest of the group just stared at me. Either this was some elaborate prank that they were all playing on me, or I was the only skeptic out of the group.
Nonsense? Did you not see his face?
Rachel said, as if offended I would even suggest he could make something like that up.
Whether what he saw and heard was real or not, he absolutely believes what he told us.
So you think I just made it all up then, huh, Nick? Todd appeared behind me just like the monster in his story, just about sending my heart through my chest, and me to the floor. No, well, if you're such a tough guy, why don't you just go on out there then, he said. I've got it all set up for you. Tent, sleeping bag, the works. Let's see you make it out in that same spot through the night, and then maybe I'll say that maybe I just imagined it. I felt backed into a corner at this point. I didn't think myself a tough guy, but I also didn't want to chicken out after apparently being the only one that didn't believe his little story. And the truth was, I still didn't. But there was something about it. Just the idea of a humanoid creature wandering the woods, plus the thought of spending a night out there by myself in those woods that were creepy enough all on their own. My stomach took a turn. I thought of every excuse I could to get out of it, but I knew there was no escaping this. I'd put my foot too far into my own mouth, and now I had to prove him wrong. Fine then, I said. I'll do it tomorrow night. The next night, Todd pulled over to the side of the road right about where I imagined he had when he was telling us his goofy story. You ready? He asked, hopping down from the driver's side of the truck. The truth was I wasn't, but I also wasn't about to back out now. I zipped up my jacket and threw my backpack around my shoulder before hopping out of the truck. I faced the woods, and like a bad omen, I saw what little of the light that remained from the overcast skies be swallowed up completely through the thick foliage in front of me. Come on then, Todd said impatiently as he headed into the tree line. You may still think this is all some big joke, but I'm telling you, I'm showing you the campsite, giving you one last chance to back out and come back out with me, and then I'm out of there, man. I didn't say anything more as I pulled my backpack straps tight against my chest and followed him into the darkness. The walk felt like an eternity. The deeper we walked, the thicker the air seemed to grow around me. I had a terrible, ominous feeling about what was to come, but again, my pride seemed to get the better of me as we ventured deeper into the thicket. Todd's pace was unrelenting, but finally he seemed to slow up, surveying his surroundings, seemingly trying to find something familiar. "I think it's this way," he said with little confidence, but I was quickly reassured as I could see the faded red tent just past the tree line. "Yep, here we are." We stepped into the camp, and it was just as he'd described it. Undisturbed tent with 2 sleeping bags that had been prepared, but unused, a fire pit, and a knapsack full of PB&J that seemed to be in the beginnings of sprouting mold from all the moisture. "All right, man, you good?" Todd started backing toward the tree line toward the direction we'd just come in from. I don't know what I expected, but he must have been serious when he said he wasn't staying any longer than he needed to. "Are you kidding?" I said with incredulous shock. "You're really just gonna take off?" "Nick, I'm telling you, man, just come back with me now. I'll even lie for you and say you stayed out here the whole night." I must admit, the offer was tempting, and with the benefit of hindsight, I wish more than anything I'd taken him up on it. But again, maybe it was just my pride, or just a need to prove him a liar, so I gave him a thumbs up. He turned away and began to walk with fervor again before stopping one last time to look back at me. Only this time he didn't say anything. He simply shook his head like a disappointed parent, searching for the exact thing to say to help me make the right decision. I guess the words just never came to him because the next thing I knew, he was gone. I stood around for a few minutes as I looked for something to do. The typical camping experience was ruined at this point. There was nothing to set up or prepare, and I'd be lying if I didn't say Todd's little ghost story was gnawing at the back of my skull. So I found a log next to the fire pit, started a fire of my own, and just enjoyed what was otherwise a beautiful scene. It wasn't long before what little of the sunlight was left had disappeared completely through the trees. I wondered what Todd must be thinking back at his warm house. I fought my thoughts as I could tell they were starting to race. Here I was, sitting alone in the dark in the middle of the woods with nothing but the sound of the crackling fire and the random sounds of wildlife. But a couple of hours passed by, and nothing. I ate a couple of my own PB&Js, stirred the fire a bit more, and finally resigned myself to try to get some sleep. I got to my feet and prepared to douse the fire, but what came next, I'll remember for the rest of my life. A deep, guttural shriek vibrated off the trunks of the trees. It was something between a howl and a blood-curdling scream. I stood there, unable to move for what seemed hours while I tried to convince myself that this was nothing more than the scream of an elk or a fox. But even I knew it couldn't have been those things. My first thought was to sprint out of the woods, just like Todd had done a few nights before, but I quickly remembered why I was here in the first place. Not to mention I didn't have a getaway car like Todd did, and quickly reasoned that I was stuck here. Whether I wanted to leave or not, it didn't matter anymore. Still, the scream was enough to make my hair stand on end, so I quickly suffocated the fire and made for the tent just a few feet away. As I unzipped the tent, something drew my eyesight back toward the tree line about 20 feet away. I swear I could feel my heart stop. It wasn't clear, but there was a thin ray of light that flowed in through the moonlight in the distance. Shrouded in darkness and silhouetted by the small fragments of light was something crouched down next to the trees. And just like Todd's story the night before, I could see the misty breath flowing away in time with its labored, growling breathing. I thought to run. Whether fight or flight got the better of me, all I could think to do was to dive into the tent, zip up the opening in front of me, and bury myself, fully clothed in the sleeping bag like a child who thought the covers in my bedroom would protect me from the monsters under my bed. What was I doing? Why was I not flying through the woods right now away from whatever this thing was? Terrified, I lay paralyzed in the tent, squeezing my eyelids as tightly shut as I could. And just as a few minutes had passed, just as I thought that maybe I'd imagined it, or that it was some animal that chose to leave, I heard the crunching of the foliage in the direction of where the thing sat. I prayed silently that it had become bored and was moving away, but I quickly realized that it was coming toward the tent, slowly, quietly, and I couldn't help but feel it was zeroing in on me like a lion preparing to spring on its prey. I looked toward my feet and towards the door of the tent as it remained closed. I half expected and waited for it to be ripped open, but soon the creature made it to the door, and the sound stopped again. It was taunting me at this point. It had to be. As I heard it crouch down again, I covered my mouth, trying to stifle the exasperated, desperate breaths that were escaping me like a busted helium balloon. But there was nothing to hide. The thing knew I was in here, and it was simply a matter of when it would decide to make its move. I didn't know what was going through my mind anymore, and whether I was deciding how to survive this, or just accepting that these were going to be my last few moments. I faced toward the opening of the tent, waiting for the moment the creature would tear through the door, and then through me. But moments passed of its hideous breathing. Soon it stood again, making its way toward the back of my tent and toward my head. It crouched again, maybe a foot from where my head lay, and I couldn't help but think there was nothing more than a thin sheet of nylon standing between me and my demise. Maybe it didn't see me. Maybe it doesn't know I'm here. But could it hear me? Smell me? My mind raced as I heard its rugged breathing inches from my ear, and then what came next still haunts me to this very day. The creature spoke. It wasn't the voice of a person, or even a monster out of the movies. It was death-like, raspy. The only way I can describe it is if hell itself had a voice. "Hello," it said, greeting me as if we were long-lost friends. I remained silent, still hoping beyond hope that it didn't truly know I was in here, but it soon dispelled that theory. "I know you're in there," it said, a ragged wheezing following each and every sentence. "I can hear you, smell you. I can smell your fear." That sentence alone took what little breath I had left in my lungs clean out of my body. What was I to do now? Continue to play possum or give in to whatever it wanted? Going against my better judgment, I responded, saying what any kid would say when facing impending death. "What are you?" I said, doing everything I could, yet failing miserably to control the quavering in my voice. The creature chuckled a long, lowly, wheezy chuckle. "What am I?" it asked, as if only realizing it for the first time in its existence that it wasn't human. "What am I? I'm the thing that haunts your dreams. I'm the creature under your bed. I'm the monster that dwells in the dark parts of your memories." "What do you want?" I asked with even less conviction. The answer was almost certainly something I didn't want to hear, but perhaps my mind had simply gone into autopilot, utilizing some form of self-preservation technique in an attempt to prolong my life by asking questions that really had no bearing on whether I lived or died. The creature didn't answer right away. Instead, I was forced to lie there for several more minutes listening to its unbearable raspy breathing as it contemplated its answer. "What do I want?" it said, repeating my question once again as if it never had any reason to question its purpose until this very moment. "I want to destroy souls. I want to strike fear into the hearts of men. I want all to fear as they turn every corner, to worry every second they have their eyes closed, to always wonder what's lurking in the woods." Whether it was an accepting of my personal fate or something else, I had come to a point where I began to fear less, or at the very least, only wanted answers. But I began to converse with it. "How long have you been in these woods?" I said with as much bravery as I can muster. "Why have there not been more cases of missing people or dead bodies found in our town? I've never even heard of you. Are there more of you?" The creature chuckled again, but this time it felt angry, like the kind of laugh an exasperated person gives when feeling like they're being challenged. "Long ago I was cursed to roam these woods for eternity. I can never leave. I can never die. I feed when some unsuspecting hiker wanders deep into my midst, or campers when they travel too far off the trail, or when unsuspecting young men set up camp, perfectly for me to find them." A chill ran up my spine. I suspected that I was going to die, but until now it hadn't been explicitly stated. Hearing it out loud made my stomach turn. Perhaps it was self-preservation taking over, but I sat up in my tent looking toward the front door flap. Was I preparing to run? I knew I had to keep the thing occupied, distracted. I racked my brain for more questions, but I knew there wasn't much left to ask before it realized I was simply stalling. I planned my next moves accordingly. I would lurch for the door, unzip the flap as quickly as possible, and run as fast and fiercely as I could. Was the creature fast? I hope not as fast as I was when afraid. But if it was true, and the creature was unable to escape the woods, I had a chance. I slowly moved toward the door as I asked my last question. "What's your name?" It chuckled again. "I've been known by many names. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti, Wendigo, Yeren. But you..." The creature took a long pause as it seemed to stand as the crunching of the leaves and twigs beneath its feet buckled under its immense weight. "They call me Death." With that, I leapt forward, wrenching open the door and sprinting wildly into the woods. I didn't look back as I left through the opening Todd had led me through only a few hours before. I could hear the thunderous footfalls behind me as the thing pursued me, but I had never run so fast in my life, never done anything with so much vigor and purpose. If I could only get to the road, get back to civilization, then I would be safe. Not long after I heard the footfalls stop, my thudding heart began to ease. I could see the road in the moonlight only a few more paces ahead of me. I was going to make it. Whether it was a lack of judgment or a morbid sense of curiosity, I turned slightly to see where the creature had gone. And there it was, draped in the moonlight in a clearing maybe 100 feet behind me. It had stopped, standing straight up. It had to be more than 8 feet tall, covered in matted hair from head to toe, with hideous eyes that glinted in the moonlight. It looked upward and bellowed a foul screech that I'll never forget as long as I live. I turned to run and never looked back as I made it to the road, never to be the same again. The last few days of my senior year were much less eventful. Todd and I never spoke again. Maybe it was guilt, but something told me that he struggled with the realization of what he'd led me into that night. Deep down, I knew he didn't believe it to begin with, but the fear in my eyes was enough to prove that we'd both seen the creature in the woods. Sleep was never again the same for me. As the creature stated, I now worried every second that my eyes were closed, as I didn't know what would be there the moment I opened them. I sat in my room, finishing up some homework for the evening. I closed my laptop and shut off my light before looking through the rain-speckled glass into the woods behind my house. The soft pitter-patter of the rain never ceased as I looked at the same spot in the woods, just under the tree line. There it stood, staring at me, and I at him, just as it had every night since that night in the woods, watching me, waiting patiently for the day that I'd wander carelessly into its path once again.